We have a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our lord and master. It has rendered us docile, helpless. If we want to protest, it suppresses our protest. If we want to act independently, it demands that we don't do so. Don Juan Matus. Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone had a good weekend. Good weekend, I guess, for us, even though it's freezing. I think it's going to be -9 tomorrow morning. It's pretty cold. It snowed on Friday, and it got below freezing temps on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday it will be freezing as well. Ice fishing is going to be good once it kind of warms up enough to do that. My son has been sick. I think he's got hand, foot, and mouth, so he's going to be with me all day tomorrow. Thursday, I have my court thing. And, well, tonight, let's just go because there's a lot of things I want to talk about. So, first thing is first, my usual intro, donations. I work with full disclosure and transparency. You can donate to me via Bitcoin or Vertcoin. It's been over 19 months, and I've never gotten anyone to donate via Bitcoin or Vertcoin, even though I have my address. You can always look it up on a blockchain explorer. These two were for me when I took money out of my Patreon and gave it all to Susie Dawson when she needed it, and nothing for Vertcoin. I've gotten donations via Google Super Chat and PayPal.me. PayPal.me I set up on September 22nd, 2019. First video of the month, I let people see all the donations that I received for the previous month and also all once total. If you don't have any money to donate, you can always prove the globe Earth and get $15,000 from Zen Garcia. Maybe donate to me a 10% finder's fee. I mean, that's easy money, right? So go ahead and do it. Join the Flat Earth People Finder at zoomtruth.com and get involved. I haven't been working on that Zoom meeting. So every live stream I do, you can join me unless I'm doing it like a specific interview. So you can always come in and chat with me with the topic at hand, or you can segue to something else sometimes. But sometimes if I'm going on about something, I may say, okay, let me do this part, and you could, we'll talk about it afterwards, or put you in a waiting room. Zoom meeting, you can, show your face, tell us your name, or you could just call in, be anonymous. Anyways, that is that. So, one thing I wanted to go over was, the Crow House, Max Egan, that's not his real name, made up another video after a couple of interesting videos, and he's kind of went on with a bunch of things that I don't necessarily agree with, but this one, I started looking into it more, and it is pretty interesting. Now I'm going to play this snippet, and then I'm going to kind of talk more about into it in detail. So let's go.
This predator is what it's talked of in all cultures, folks. I mean, the Africans call it the Chitahuri, the Gnostics called it the Archons. The Arabics call it the Djinn. I mean, it's in all cultures. They talk about this mind that gets in and infects you. The cultures of ancient or old Russia and stuff simply called it the social parasite. I think a lot of American Indian cultures also refer to it as the social parasite, also the Wakito virus, the thing that makes you do bad things even though you know they're bad and you do them anyway. But it's it's this thing that makes you want to get things organized, and it's the brain chatter in your head and gives you the desires that you don't know why you're doing this, but you just do it anyway. It's the predator mind that makes this happen. And it's important to understand what the predator mind feeds on, because when you understand what its food is, you begin to see what the truth movement is and what we've been tricked into doing, and what they're attempting to do now with this whole virtual reality thing and the whole flat earth thing and where it's all going. So
All right. So, interesting thing about that, because it is true. If you think about of all the different civilizations in the past, and all of them talk about some type of entity, and it's not like a physical entity, except for if you look at the current religious organized religions of today, they all point to a physical and external entity that's either good or evil. But in all the civilizations before, even all the indigenous civilizations that have been recently conquered, they've always talked about a internal spiritual entity, whether it's an embodiment of evil or an embodiment of good, what have you. Whether that goes to the Gnostics, who were claimed as heretics by the Orthodox Christians and whatnot, or the church, and whether it's the Chitahuri tribes of Africa, whether it's Native American tribes, they call it social parasites, whether it's from Mexico, where they call it the predator mind, or like he was Mexican was also saying, like the Middle East and with the Djinn. I mean, from all over, it appears that this central enemy of mankind has always been with the mind. And even within certain, you know how they talk about consciousness, you've got that. Yeah, they even depicted it in cartoons. They had that angel saying, "Don't do it," and they got that little devil with the trident going, "Do it. You know you want to do it." They even depicted in that stuff. But we all kind of grew up with this. Is like, yeah, okay, that's just like fairy tale stories and all that. But now we're getting to the point where we see that a lot of these fairy tales, mythologies, had a lot of truth to it, and we can find out that there's a lot of truth to it because now we're finally getting all these things that are passed down generation by generation through word of mouth and apprenticeships and things like that, and not written down by some person or groups that had positions of power of control or a system of control that they had. And we're getting to see that, well, all these systems of control that we seem to find that, they have a pretty much easy motive, which is to control through either the government, religion, money, materialism, history, and information, any of that stuff. All these methods and systems of control, they've been there. You're either going to support the establishment and all these systems of control, or you're going to rebel against them. And the only main difference between them is just the truth. And it's getting to the point where you really don't want to fight other people because the people aren't your enemies. And a lot of this depiction is seen with like the ideas of MK Ultra, mind control. Heck, it was even in Marvel Civil War. Remember with I keep forgetting his name, but the guy with the arm, Captain America's friend, right? He got mind controlled, killed Iron Man's parents, although it wasn't really him that did it, because if it was him, he wouldn't have done it, but he was under influence of mind control type of thing. So, and if your friends, your family, whatever, are under control of something that they have no power over, or they just don't know how to take control over it, it's the same thing. You notice when people who have alcohol abuse and they get drunk, they're not the same person as when they're sober. And you don't blame them for the things that they do. You blame the alcohol, which they don't seem to have control over themselves when they start taking alcohol or drugs or anything else. You want to help them cure themselves of whatever it is that they have. And so you're not really at war with that person who's under the influence of something that is not themselves. You are pretty much at war with the things that get them to that point. So pretty good. So a lot of the stuff I've been kind of going and listening, reading and listening. So you'll be able to see where we'll do the main monitor stuff. So what I'm going to do is play back some of the Carlos Castaneda's The Active Side of Infinity, and it's a long one, but there's an audio book for it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the audio book. I'm going to start with near the end, and I'm going to kind of move it from one portion to another portion, and kind of give my thoughts. I think I can do my thoughts afterwards, and just a long snippet, or if there's a certain point where I really want to say something, how it relates to my experiences with ayahuasca and these waking dreams, which I'm gonna have to rename based on Don Juan Matus and what he was saying. So this is kind of just the intro. It's part one. We're gonna go over the Yaqui Indians in Mexico and their predator, and a lot of the stuff that I kind of went over, and a lot of people know, especially with the things that I've been going through with the Gnostics and Gnosticism and the Archons. A lot of people understand that concept. It's not a physical, again, it's not an external physical entity or being of good and evil. These are all internal, different realm that affects our mind. And where we get all these thoughts, whether it's positive or negative thoughts or creative types of things, whether that creativity is our core self and source, or all these other thoughts that interfere with that creative process are these entities, whatnot. And so we'll see. It'll be interesting. Mike Wick. Good topic. There's no end to it. Unfortunately, paradox loop, the oldest tablets, mythology, and religions are all talking about the same thing. Slight variations, same exact thing. Yes. All these, they are. It's hard to ignore once you know it, and if you do ignore it, why are you ignoring it? Which is, it's the only thing that we can grasp from history, from our, passed down from generation to generation type of things, that's not now written down by some authority figure or a system of control and all of that stuff. So anyways, I'm going to play it back and we'll go over, you can read along as well as listening to it.
Mud shadows. To sit in silence with Don Juan was one of the most enjoyable experiences I knew. We were comfortably sitting on some stuffed chairs in the back of his house in the mountains of central Mexico. It was late afternoon. There was a pleasant breeze. The sun was behind the house at our backs. Its fading light created exquisite shades of green in the big trees in the backyard. There were big trees growing around his house and beyond it, which obliterated the site of the city where he lived. This always gave me the impression that I was in the wilderness, a different wilderness than the barren Sonoran desert, but wilderness nonetheless. Today we're going to discuss a most serious topic in sorcery, Don Juan said abruptly, and we're going to begin by talking about the energy body. He had described the energy body to me countless times, saying that it was a conglomerate of energy fields, the mirror image of the conglomerate of energy fields that makes up the physical body when it is seen as energy that flows in the universe. He had said that it was smaller, more compact, and of heavier appearance than the luminous sphere of the physical body. Don Juan had explained that the body and the energy body were two conglomerates of energy fields compressed together by some strange agglutinizing force. He had emphasized to no end that the force that binds that group of energy fields together was, according to the sorcerers of ancient Mexico, the most mysterious force in the universe. His personal estimation was that it was the pure essence of the entire cosmos, the sum total of everything there is. He had asserted that the physical body and the energy body were the only counterbalanced energy configurations in our realm as human beings. He accepted, therefore, no other dualism than the one between these two. The dualism between body and mind, spirit and flesh, he considered to be a mere concatenation of the mind, emanating from it without any energetic foundation. Don Juan had said that by means of discipline, it's possible for anyone to bring the energy body closer to the physical body. Normally, the distance between the two is enormous. Once the energy body is within a certain range, which varies for each of us individually, anyone, through discipline, can forge it into the exact replica of their physical body, that is to say, a three-dimensional solid being. Hence the sorcerer's idea of the other, or the double. By the same token, through the same processes of discipline, anyone can forge their three-dimensional, solid physical body to be a perfect replica of their energy body. That is to say, an ethereal charge of energy invisible to the human eye, as all energy is. When Don Juan had told me all about this, my reaction had been to ask him if he was describing a mythical proposition. He'd replied that there was nothing mythical about sorcerers. Sorcerers were practical beings, and what they described was always something quite sober and down to earth. According to Don Juan, the difficulty in understanding what sorcerers did was that they proceeded from a different cognitive system. Sitting at the back of his house in central Mexico that day, Don Juan said that the energy body was of key importance in whatever was taking place in my life. He saw that it was an energetic fact that my energy body, instead of moving away from me, as it normally happens, was approaching me with great speed. "What does it mean that it's approaching me, Don Juan?" I asked. "It means that something is going to knock the daylights out of you," he said, smiling. "A tremendous degree of control is going to come into your life, but not your control, the energy body's control." "Do you mean, Don Juan, that some outside force will control me?" I asked. "There are scores of outside forces controlling you at this moment," Don Juan replied. "The control that I'm referring to is something outside the domain of language. It is your control, and at the same time, it is not. It cannot be classified, but it can certainly be experienced, and above all, it can certainly be manipulated. Remember this. It can be manipulated to your total advantage, of course, which, again, is not your advantage, but the energy body's advantage. However, the energy body is you, so we could go on forever like dogs biting their own tails trying to describe this. Language is inadequate. All these experiences are beyond syntax." Darkness had descended very quickly, and the foliage of the trees that had been glowing green a little while before was now very dark and heavy. Don Juan said that if I paid close attention to the darkness of the foliage, without focusing my eyes, but sort of looked at it from the corner of my eye, I would see a fleeting shadow crossing my field of vision. "This is the appropriate time of day for doing what I'm asking you to do," he said. "It takes a moment to engage the necessary attention in you to do it. Don't stop until you catch that fleeting black shadow." I did see some strange fleeting black shadow projected on the foliage of the trees. It was either one shadow going back and forth, or various fleeting shadows moving from left to right, or right to left, or straight up in the air. They looked like fat black fish to me. Enormous fish. It was as if a gigantic swordfish were flying in the air. I was engrossed in the sight. Then, finally, it scared me. It became too dark to see the foliage, yet I could still see the fleeting black shadows. "What is it, Don Juan?" I asked. "I see fleeting black shadows all over the place." "Ah, that's the universe at large," he said. "Incommensurable, non-linear, outside the realm of syntax. The sorcerers of ancient Mexico were the first ones to see those fleeting shadows, so they followed them around. They saw them as you were seeing them, and they saw them as energy that flows in the universe. And they did discover something transcendental. He stopped talking and looked at me. His pauses were perfectly placed. He always stopped talking when I was hanging by a thread. "What did they discover, Don Juan?" I asked. "They discovered that we have a companion for life," he said, as clearly as he could. "We have a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our lord and master. It has rendered us docile, helpless. If we want to protest, it suppresses our protest. If we want to act independently, it demands that we don't do so." It was very dark around us, and that seemed to curtail any expression on my part. If it had been daylight, I would have laughed my head off. In the dark, I felt quite inhibited. "It's pitch black around us," Don Juan said, "but if you look out of the corner of your eye, you will still see fleeting shadows jumping all around you." He was right. I could still see them. Their movement made me dizzy. Don Juan turned on the light, and that seemed to dissipate everything. "You have arrived, by your effort alone, to what the shamans of ancient Mexico called the topic of topics," Don Juan said. "I've been beating around the bush all this time, insinuating to you that something is holding us prisoner. Indeed, we are held prisoner. This was an energetic fact for the sorcerers of ancient Mexico." "Why has this predator taken over in the fashion that you're describing, Don Juan?" I asked. "There must be a logical explanation." "There is an explanation," Don Juan replied, "which is the simplest explanation in the world. They took over because we are food for them, and they squeeze us mercilessly because we are their sustenance. Just as we rear chickens in chicken coops, gallineros, the predators rear us in human coops, humaneros. Therefore, their food is always available to them." I felt that my head was shaking violently from side to side. I couldn't express my profound sense of unease and discontentment, but my body moved to bring it to the surface. I shook from head to toe without any volition on my part. "No, no, no, no," I heard myself saying. "This is absurd, Don Juan. What you're saying is something monstrous. It simply can't be true for sorcerers or for average men or for anyone." "Why not?" Don Juan asked calmly. "Why not? Because it infuriates you?" "Yes, it infuriates me," I retorted. "Those claims are monstrous." "Well," he said, "you haven't heard all the claims yet. Wait a bit longer and see how you feel. I'm going to subject you to a blitz. That is, I'm going to subject your mind to tremendous onslaughts, and you cannot get up and leave because you're caught. Not because I'm holding you prisoner, but because something in you will prevent you from leaving, while another part of you is going to go truthfully berserk. So brace yourself." There was something in me which was, I felt, a glutton for punishment. He was right. I wouldn't have left the house for the world, and yet I didn't like one bit the inanities he was spouting. "I want to appeal to your analytical mind," Don Juan said. "Think for a moment and tell me how you would explain the contradiction between the intelligence of man, the engineer, and the stupidity of his systems of beliefs, or the stupidity of his contradictory behavior. Sorcerers believe that the predators have given us our systems of beliefs, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They are the ones who set up our hopes and expectations and dreams of success or failure. They have given us covetousness, greed, and cowardice. It is the predators who make us complacent, routinary, and egomaniacal." "But how can they do this, Don Juan?" I asked, somehow angered further by what he was saying. Do they whisper all that in our ears while we're asleep? No, they don't do it that way. That's idiotic, Don Juan said, smiling. They are infinitely more efficient and organized than that. In order to keep us obedient and meek and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of a fighting strategist. A horrendous maneuver from the point of view of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind. Do you hear me? The predators give us their mind, which becomes our mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute now. I know that even though you've never suffered hunger, he went on, you have food anxiety, which is none other than the anxiety of the predator who fears that at any moment now its maneuver is going to be uncovered and food is going to be denied. Through the mind, which after all is their mind, the predators inject into the lives of human beings whatever is convenient for them, and they ensure in this manner a degree of security to act as a buffer against their fear. It's not that I can't accept all this at face value, Don Juan, I said. I could, but there's something so odious about it that it actually repels me. It forces me to take a contradictory stand. If it's true that they eat us, how do they do it? Don Juan had a broad smile on his face. He was as pleased as Punch. He explained that sorcerers see infant human beings as strange, luminous balls of energy, covered from the top to the bottom with a glowing coat, something like a plastic cover that is adjusted tightly over their cocoon of energy. He said that glowing coat of awareness was what the predators consumed, and that when a human being reached adulthood, all that was left of that glowing coat of awareness was a narrow fringe that went from the ground to the top of the toes. That fringe permitted mankind to continue living, but only barely. As if I'd been in a dream, I heard Don Juan Matus explaining that, to his knowledge, man was the only species that had the glowing coat of awareness outside that luminous cocoon. Therefore, he became easy prey for an awareness of a different order, such as the heavy awareness of the predator. He then made the most damaging statement he'd made so far. He said that this narrow fringe of awareness was the epicenter of self-reflection, where man was irremediably caught. By playing on our self-reflection, which is the only point of awareness left to us, the predators create flares of awareness that they proceed to consume in a ruthless, predatory fashion. They give us inane problems that force those flares of awareness to rise, and in this manner they keep us alive in order for them to be fed with the energetic flare of our pseudo-concerns. There must have been something to what Don Juan was saying, which was so devastating to me that at that point I actually got sick to my stomach. After a moment's pause, long enough for me to recover, I asked Don Juan, "But why is it that the sorcerers of ancient Mexico and all sorcerers today, although they see the predators, don't do anything about it?" "There's nothing that you and I can do about it," Don Juan said in a grave, sad voice. "All we can do is discipline ourselves to the point where they will not touch us. How can you ask your fellow men to go through with those rigors of discipline? They'll laugh and make fun of you, and the more aggressive ones will beat the shit out of you. And not so much because they don't believe it. Down in the depths of every human being, there's an ancestral, visceral knowledge about the predator's existence." My analytical mind swung back and forth like a yo-yo. It left me and came back and left me and came back again. Whatever Don Juan was proposing was preposterous, incredible. At the same time, it was a most reasonable thing. So simple. It explained every kind of human contradiction I could think of. But how could one have taken all this seriously? Don Juan was pushing me into the path of an avalanche that would take me down forever. I felt another wave of a threatening sensation. The wave didn't stem from me, yet it was attached to me. Don Juan was doing something to me, mysteriously positive and terribly negative at the same time. I sensed it as an attempt to cut a thin film that seemed to be glued to me. His eyes were fixed on mine in an unblinking stare. He moved his eyes away and began to talk without looking at me anymore. "Whenever doubts plague you to a dangerous point," he said, "do something pragmatic about it. Turn off the light. Pierce the darkness. Find out what you can see." He got up to turn off the lights. I stopped him. No, Don Juan," I said, "don't turn off the lights. I'm doing okay." What I felt then was a most unusual, for me, fear of the darkness. The mere thought of it made me pant. I definitely knew something viscerally, but I wouldn't dare touch it or bring it to the surface, not in a million years. "You saw the fleeting shadows against the trees," Don Juan said, sitting back against his chair. "That's pretty good. I'd like you to see them inside this room. You're not seeing anything. You're just merely catching fleeting images. You have enough energy for that." I feared that Don Juan would get up anyway and turn off the lights, which he did. 2 seconds later, I was screaming my head off. Not only did I catch a glimpse of those fleeting images, I heard them buzzing by my ears. Don Juan doubled up with laughter as he turned on the lights. "What a temperamental fellow," he said. "A total disbeliever on the one hand, and a total pragmatist on the other. You must arrange this internal fight. Otherwise, you're going to swell up like a big toad and burst." Don Juan kept on pushing his barb deeper and deeper into me. "The sorcerers of ancient Mexico," he said, "saw the predator. They called it the flyer because it leaps through the air. It's not a pretty sight. It's a big shadow, impenetrably dark, a black shadow that jumps through the air. Then it lands flat on the ground. The sorcerers of ancient Mexico were quite ill at ease with the idea of when it made its appearance on Earth. They reasoned that man must have been a complete being at one point, with stupendous insights, feats of awareness that are mythological legends nowadays. And then everything seems to disappear. And we have now a sedated man." I wanted to get angry, call him a paranoiac, but somehow the righteousness that was usually just underneath the surface of my being wasn't there. Something in me was beyond the point of asking myself my favorite question: what if all that he said is true? At the moment he was talking to me that night, in my heart of hearts, I felt that all of what he was saying was true, but at the same time, and with equal force, all that he was saying was absurdity itself. "What are you saying, Don Juan?" I asked feebly. My throat was constricted. I could hardly breathe. "What I'm saying is that what we have against us is not a simple predator. It is very smart and organized. It follows a methodical system to render us useless. Man, the magical being that he is destined to be, is no longer magical. He's an average piece of meat. There are no more dreams for man, but the dreams of an animal who's being raised to become a piece of meat. Trite, conventional, imbecilic." Don Juan's words were eliciting a strange bodily reaction in me, comparable to the sensation of nausea. It was as if I was going to get sick to my stomach again. But the nausea was coming from the bottom of my being, from the marrow of my bones. I convulsed involuntarily. Don Juan shook me by the shoulders forcefully. I felt my neck wobbling back and forth under the impact of his grip. The maneuver calmed me down at once. I felt more in control. "This predator," Don Juan said, "which of course is an inorganic being, is not altogether invisible to us, as other inorganic beings are. I think, as children, we do see it and decide it's so horrific that we don't want to think about it. Children, of course, could insist on focusing on the sight, but everybody else around them dissuades them from doing so. The only alternative left for mankind," he continued, "is discipline. Discipline is the only deterrent. But by discipline, I don't mean harsh routines. I don't mean waking up every morning at 5:30 and throwing cold water on yourself until you're blue. Sorcerers understand discipline as the capacity to face with serenity odds that are not included in our expectations. For them, discipline is an art. The art of facing infinity without flinching, not because they're strong and tough, but because they are filled with awe." "In what way would the sorcerer's discipline be a deterrent?" I asked. "Sorcerers say that discipline makes the glowing coat of awareness unpalatable to the flyer," Don Juan said, scrutinizing my face as if to discover any signs of disbelief. "The result is that the predators become bewildered. An inedible glowing coat of awareness is not part of their cognition, I suppose. After being bewildered, they don't have any recourse other than refraining from continuing their nefarious task. If the predators don't eat our glowing coat of awareness for a while," he went on, "it'll keep growing. Simplifying this matter to the extreme, I can say that sorcerers, by means of their discipline, push the predators away long enough to allow their glowing coat of awareness to grow beyond the level of their toes. Once it goes beyond the level of the toes, it grows back to its natural size. The sorcerers of ancient Mexico used to say that the glowing coat of awareness is like a tree. If it is not pruned, it grows to its natural size and volume. As awareness reaches levels higher than the toes, tremendous maneuvers of perception become a matter of course. The grand trick of those sorcerers of ancient times," Don Juan continued, "was to burden the flyer's mind with discipline. They found out that if they taxed the flyer's mind with inner silence, the foreign installation would flee, giving to any one of the practitioners involved in this maneuver the total certainty of the mind's foreign origin. The foreign installation comes back, I assure you, but not as strong, and a process begins in which the fleeing of the flyer's mind becomes routine until one day it flees permanently. A sad day indeed. That's the day when you have to rely on your own devices, which are nearly zero. There's no one to tell you what to do. There's no mind of foreign origin to dictate the imbecilities you're accustomed to. My teacher, the Nagual Julian, used to warn all his disciples," Don Juan continued, "that this was the toughest day in a sorcerer's life, for the real mind that belongs to us, the sum total of our experience, after a lifetime of domination, has been rendered shy, insecure, and shifty. Personally, I would say that the real battle of sorcerers begins at that moment. The rest is merely preparation." I became genuinely agitated. I wanted to know more, and yet a strange feeling in me clamored for me to stop. It alluded to dark results and punishment, something like the wrath of God descending on me for tampering with something veiled by God himself. I made a supreme effort to allow my curiosity to win. What do you mean?" I heard myself say, "by taxing the flyer's mind?" "Discipline taxes the foreign mind to no end," he replied. "So through their discipline, sorcerers vanquish the foreign installation." I was overwhelmed by his statements. I believed that Don Juan was either certifiably insane, or that he was telling me something so awesome that it froze everything in me. I noticed, however, how quickly I rallied my energy to deny everything he'd said. After an instant of panic, I began to laugh, as if Don Juan had told me a joke. I even heard myself saying, Don Juan, you're incorrigible." Don Juan seemed to understand everything I was experiencing. He shook his head from side to side and raised his eyes to the heavens in a gesture of mock despair. "I am so incorrigible," he said, "that I am going to give the flyer's mind, which you carry inside you, one more jolt. I am going to reveal to you one of the most extraordinary secrets of sorcery. I am going to describe to you a finding that took sorcerers thousands of years to verify and consolidate." He looked at me and smiled maliciously. "The flyer's mind flees forever," he said, "when a sorcerer succeeds in grabbing on to the vibrating force that holds us together as a conglomerate of energy fields. If a sorcerer maintains that pressure long enough, the flyer's mind flees in defeat. And that's exactly what you are going to do. Hold on to the energy that binds you together." I had the most inexplicable reaction I could have imagined. Something in me actually shook, as if it had received a jolt. I entered into a state of unwarranted fear, which I immediately associated with my religious background. Don Juan looked at me from head to toe. "You're fearing the wrath of God, aren't you?" he said. "Rest assured, that's not your fear. It's the flyer's fear, because it knows that you will do exactly as I'm telling you." His words didn't calm me at all. I felt worse. I was actually convulsing involuntarily, and I had no means to stop it. "Don't worry," Don Juan said calmly. "I know for a fact that those attacks wear off very quickly. The flyer's mind has no concentration whatsoever." After a moment, everything stopped, as Don Juan had predicted. To say again that I was bewildered is a euphemism. This was the first time ever, with Don Juan or alone in my life, that I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I wanted to get out of the chair and walk around, but I was deathly afraid. I was filled with rational assertions, and at the same time I was filled with an infantile fear. I began to breathe deeply as a cold perspiration covered my entire body. I had somehow unleashed on myself a most god-awful sight. Black, fleeting shadows jumping all around me wherever I turned. I closed my eyes and rested my head on the arm of the stuffed chair. "I don't know which way to turn, Don Juan," I said. "Tonight you've really succeeded in getting me lost." "You're being torn by an internal struggle," Don Juan said. "Down in the depths of you, you know that you are incapable of refusing the agreement that an indispensable part of you, your glowing coat of awareness, is going to serve as an incomprehensible source of nourishment to naturally incomprehensible entities. And another part of you will stand against this situation with all its might. The sorcerer's revolution," he continued, "is that they refuse to honor agreements in which they did not participate. Nobody ever asked me if I would consent to be eaten by beings of a different kind of awareness. My parents just brought me into this world to be food like themselves, and that's the end of the story." Don Juan stood up from his chair and stretched his arms and legs. "We've been sitting here for hours. It's time to go into the house. I'm going to eat. Do you want to eat with me?" I declined. My stomach was in an uproar. "I think you'd better go to sleep," he said. "The Blitz has devastated you." I didn't need any further coaxing. I collapsed onto my bed and fell asleep like the dead. At home, as time went by, the idea of the flyers became one of the main fixations of my life. I got to the point where I felt that Don Juan was absolutely right about them. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't discard his logic. The more I thought about it, and the more I talked to and observed myself and my fellow men, the more intense the conviction that something was rendering us incapable of any activity or any interaction or any thought that didn't have the self as its focal point. My concern, as well as the concern of everyone I knew or talked to, was the self. Since I couldn't find any explanation for such universal homogeneity, I believed that Don Juan's line of thought was the most appropriate way of elucidating the phenomenon. I went as deeply as I could into readings about myths and legends. In reading, I experienced something I had never felt before. Each of the books I read was an interpretation of myths and legends. In each one of those books, a homogeneous mind was palpable. The styles differed, but the drive behind the words was homogeneously the same. Even though the theme was something as abstract as myths and legends, the authors always managed to insert statements about themselves. The homogeneous drive behind every one of those books was not the stated theme of the book. Instead, it was self-service. I had never felt this before. I attributed my reaction to Don Juan's influence. The unavoidable question that I posed to myself was, is he influencing me to see this? Or is there really a foreign mind dictating everything we do? I lapsed, perforce, into denial again, and I went insanely from denial to acceptance to denial. Something in me knew that whatever Don Juan was driving at was an energetic fact, but something equally important in me knew that all of that was guff. The end result of my internal struggle was a sense of foreboding, the sense of something imminently dangerous coming at me. I made extensive anthropological inquiries into the subject of the flyers in other cultures, but I couldn't find any references to them anywhere. Don Juan seemed to be the only source of information about this matter. The next time I saw him, I instantly jumped to talk about the flyers. "I've tried my best to be rational about this subject matter," I said. "But I can't. There are moments when I fully agree with you about these predators." "Focus your attention on the fleeting shadows that you actually see," Don Juan said with a smile. I told Don Juan that those fleeting shadows were going to be the end of my rational life. I saw them everywhere. Since I'd left his house, I was incapable of going to sleep in the dark. To sleep with the lights on didn't bother me at all. The moment I turned the lights off, however, everything around me began to jump. I never saw complete figures or shapes. All I saw were fleeting black shadows. "The flyer's mind has not left you," Don Juan said. "It has been seriously injured. It's trying its best to rearrange its relationship with you, but something in you is severed forever. The flyer knows that. The real danger is that the flyer's mind may win by getting you tired and forcing you to quit by playing the contradiction between what it says and what I say. You see, the flyer's mind has no competitors," Don Juan continued. "When it proposes something, it agrees with its own proposition and makes you believe that you've done something of worth. The flyer's mind will say to you that whatever Juan Matus is telling you is pure nonsense, and then the same mind will agree with its own proposition. Yes, of course, it's nonsense, you will say. That's the way they overcome us. The flyers are an essential part of the universe," he went on, "and they must be taken as what they really are. Awesome. monstrous. They are the means by which the universe tests us. We are energetic probes created by the universe, he continued, as if he were oblivious to my presence. And it's because we are possessors of energy that has awareness that we are the means by which the universe becomes aware of itself. The flyers are the implacable challengers. They cannot be taken as anything else. If we succeed in doing that, the universe allows us to continue. I wanted Don Juan to say more, but he said only, "The Blitz ended the last time you were here. There's only so much you could say about the flyers. It's time for another kind of maneuver." I couldn't...
All right, so I'm going to stop that there. You can keep listening to the audio book. Is that right? Okay, sorry. And you can download a whole bunch of stuff of all of Carlos Castaneda's work. There is a lot of stuff with his apprenticeship with with Don Juan Matus. It's definitely worth a read. Maybe you'll find some stuff that I haven't found that relates to your experiences. I know that there are some parts that relates to some of mine, and I'm going to go over some of them. Some of the things that he was saying in this one kind of reminded me of some things from the Neverending Story, the book, mind you, and I went over that before. It's also something in regards to the discipline of the emptiness of our thoughts, or the clear our thoughts from all the things that are going on. It relates to meditation in some ways. That's been trained throughout history, along with martial arts, the discipline and all of that. That they feed on our negative energies and things like that. That also reminds me of the tale of two wolves. I've shown that a lot, but it's and you'll see it a lot. I'll try to get here. So it's they say it's an old Cherokee chief teaching his grandson about life. He says, "A fight is going on inside me," he said to the boy. "It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, self-doubt, and ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too." The grandson then asked his father, "Which wolf will win?" The old chief simply replied, "The one you feed." So it reminded me of that as well. Yeah, Mike Wick, the nothing. It's interesting how we all kind of meet with each other, don't we, and kind of relate with our experiences and stuff like that. The Sorcerer's Revolution is something that is interesting too. That what that Sorcerer's Revolution is refusing to honor agreements in which you did not participate in. I mean, you didn't participate in being food for some predator, right? You didn't enter in an agreement with your government or with the bank and whether or not you can and can't print money, whether you should or have to pay interest on whatever loans of some, all that stuff of basically if you're born into this system and you're going with the system and you want out, it's like, well, I never said I was in, but anyways, the Mike Wick, the link is in the description box on YouTube. You'll also find it on Steemit, although you won't be able to find the replay on Steemit just because I'm going through a different live streaming service. So you can find that the link and listen to it all there. If you do a search for Carlos Castaneda PDF download, you'll be able to find, I think on archive.org, all the PDFs. There's one zip file that has like 15, 16 copies of everything, which you can read. I like to read since it's faster, but when I'm doing things where I don't have time to read, I have to focus on different things like dishwashing, taking care of the kids, whatever. I'll go ahead and play the audiobook while I'm doing tasks, and that also helps me to go through content without me ever having to be too focused. So yeah, the Sorcerer's Revolution, if you wanted to read that part, again, I think I didn't get that part. Sorcerers, probably not, I think that was a good one. Actually, and this was at the very beginning of the, he goes, the Sorcerer's Revolution, he continued, is that they refused to honor agreements in which they did not participate. Nobody ever asked me if I would consent to be eaten by beings of a different kind of awareness. My parents just brought me into this world to be food like themselves, and that's the end of the story. So that's the Sorcerer's Revolution. I think that's something that we can apply to any revolution, really, that we have, is that, we just refused to honor agreements in which we did not participate or have a say in, right? We didn't have a say in any of this. And when we do have a say in any of the things that the systems of control apply to, try to force us or control us with, we just say, look, I refuse to honor agreements in which I did not participate or have a say in. Case closed. And at that point, what can they do to you? Most is they can just force you to try to kill you, right? And you can just resist in all ways you can. And until everybody does that, you know, people are going to notice, like, well, are we really going to go to war with our family members and our friends and our countrymen just because, I mean, they are correct, you know? They didn't have a say in it and they didn't participate in it, so wait, we're going to actually force them? Isn't that slavery? You know, we're basically I think that, I mean, there's a lot I can talk about in regards to this, which would segue in many ways. You know, I think it's almost like warring factions. When we see the secret societies, mystery schools, the Illuminati and all that stuff, the people who are in charge, the human beings, how they get to elite status of wealth and notoriety, full of ego, politicians, governors, whatever. It appears as they're making that trade-off, that they're going to do the predators, whatever, Archons, Chitahuris bidding in order for exchange of living a comfortable life here, as long as they get everyone to just follow the next one ahead of them, like the cows in those where they just kill a lot of cows one by one. You know, just follow a cow in front of you. It's fine. Everything's good. And the ones during that, you know, what's that also called? You know, when there was slavery in the United States, the blacks, where the blacks would, fellow black slaves would do the biddings of their master in order to be kind of controllers of other slaves. You know, they get that higher status. They're a slave, but they're more obedient to the slave owner and all that stuff. Anyways, there's a special term for that. And it's anyways, there's also a part of me that thinks, you know, a lot of them seem to kind of know this. They understand this. They either are okay with this part because they go, well, you know, they may not understand what actually happens afterwards, and we're gonna go over more of that, what happens afterwards, because some of the stuff that happens afterwards, and that's mentioned in this book of Carlos Castaneda with Don Juan Matus. And here's the thing: Don Juan Matus was supposedly a teacher experienced with 3 psychedelics as well, which is ayahuasca, not San Pedro, but what's the one where peyote, and also another type is just like devil's weed or whatever. That's just another term for it. But yeah, the 3 types of psychedelics. So it's not surprising, but still, that my experience that happened, I think in 2019 and I think even 2018 maybe, very similar to experience or teachings that Don Juan Matus, which this was probably written in like the mid to late 20th century. So, I mean, I probably wasn't even born when he had this conversation with Carlos Castaneda, but it's the same experience. How does, I mean, that's just a weird, some people would say coincidence. I'd say it's synchronicity or something. It's truth. Anyways, I also think that there's a faction of these secret societies, cults, and Illuminati, the people who realize that they are actually still slaves, even they're at the top of the slaves, that they want to be released from all of this, released from the predator mind. They want to be able to compete against them and take control over other humans themselves, right? Be at the top without the head honcho, right? It's like that slave who serves their master well and gets special treatment, eventually realizes, hey, if I just get rid of the master, I become the master, type of thing. So, yeah. Anyways, Mike Wick 77. Just look on the description box. All my links are there. Now, especially on YouTube, it's all there. The audiobook, the actual written PDF, just type in Carlos Castaneda audio PDF downloads. You'll find his work in a zip file. It's good stuff. Let's see. So that's that part. There's a lot of good stuff in this, and I'm just going to continue on with it. Now, this is Carlos Castaneda's sixth book, The Active Side of Infinity. There's plenty more out there. Like this is, if you look at the, here you're going to see a whole bunch of audiobooks, or not audiobooks, but writings, and all worth the read. I've been skimming through it, but the one I wanted to focus on was this stuff. Nagas, Djinn, demons, yeah, Enki of Deep Waters, Abzu, Anzu, Global Subconscious. All of this kind of relates into all these mythologies, right? We call them mythologies. We call them like scary terms of magic and sorcery, and all those connotations have always been bad or evil. And some of this even kind of reminds me of the Force with Star Wars, right? The energy, the focus surrounds us, binds us, and there's the dark side of the Force, the light side of the Force, and of course what we see with Disney taking over, they're kind of breaking that down, just like saying, oh no, that's not right. It's this is the Force, and it's not what the Force was written and conceived and created by George Lucas, who took it off of other works, very, very deep and profound things, and applied it to the hero's journey. So it's interesting how that works. But that we've got the warring factions of the predators themselves, the slaves, who are at the top of the pyramid, who want to become the masters, and then there's also ones, I would include myself and probably many others, who want people to find out the truth and become free themselves, and everyone to be free of the entire systems of control, whether it's the predators or the slave masters, master slaves, whatever. And it's like a three-sided war. And the thing is, I think after a lot more of like studying, reading, whatever, the end plan of the predators or whatever is, if they cannot control us, they will destroy us. But I don't think so. We have their mind, and when we understand our mind, our original creative mind, and they don't realize we can control them. That was probably the biggest flaw or weakness that they didn't realize, is they gave us their mind. We didn't give them our mind. So once we find our mind, our creative energy, and we now know how they think, and we already know how they run by food, by greed, and all these things, is we just call their bluff. They're not going to destroy their food source, because in destroying their food source, they're going to destroy themselves. They're going to do whatever it takes for them to survive. They're predators. They're not going to kill off their entire prey because they understand that's their own death. So by destroying us, they're going to destroy themselves. There's going to be so that's a simple of a fact that we can find. It's probably their the dumbest move, but it's also the smartest move. It was the only move that worked, right? I think they've tried many times to control all of us, and they failed. Now they gotten to the point, it's like, everything's nice and easy. It's smooth going. Now they find out that there's been a problem. They can't patch it up, and their end goal to destroy us won't work because they'll destroy themselves. And so it's easy to call that bluff. You know what you have to realize is that they're going against beings, and which I'm going to go over pretty soon now, that survive beyond death. When you experience death, it's going to be different than what people tell you about their near-death experiences, things like that. It's either going to be a joining process, or it's going to be a vibration to nothingness process. And I think there's probably also a point where you can come back type of process in some ways, but not quite, because we don't really die. This is something profound yet that I haven't quite experienced, which I call waking dream, but it's not called that. I shouldn't call that. I may call it what Juan Matus calls it, such as like some affinity point or something like that. I'll try to remember it again. But I mean, a lot of the stuff I read, and then I listened, and I just kind of bookmarked it, and I want to go over it live. None of this is pre-scripted that I talk about. I mean, this is all pre-written, pre-recorded, but what I say isn't scripted. Mike Wick 7. Something found it. Dark matter. Something is current with human resonance. The god Kingu was sacrificed for human souls to live with Saris. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stories of what happened. I mean, a lot of this also reminds me of how the Mayan and Egyptians, both, again, if you're into the globe or flat earth debate, the Mayans and the Egyptians were flat earthers. They were very good at math and had their own calendar systems, and those calendar systems predicted everything that happens with eclipses of the earth, of the sun and the moon, and all of that stuff. And that was all on flat earth. And that the original solar calendars that both the Mayans and the Egyptians had started at 360 days out of the year, and then it turned to 365 days out of the year. And both of those stated that those 5 additional days were dark days or negative days that you should probably stay inside and stuff like that. So that's just interesting stuff from the Mayan and Egyptian ideas of just how things were before. I mean, things seem to be perfect. And then something happened, birth of some evil spirits and deities or gods, whatever, goddesses. And all of a sudden, bad stuff happened. So 365 days a year. And it wasn't due to the orbit of the Earth around the sun. As far as like the star system, because they were flat earthers. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to move it towards 186, which is going to go through Journeys Through the Dark Sea of Awareness, which is kind of gets into it, it's going to be the point that I kind of want. Once I get to the point where it kind of resonates with the experience that I had, I'm going to stop, and you could continue reading on and listening to, but I'm going to stop it at that point and talk about it and compare it. So here we go. And it's going to start here. So I'll be quiet and start it for y'all.
Journeys through the dark sea of awareness. We can speak a little more clearly now about inner silence, Don Juan said. His statement was such a non sequitur that it startled me. He'd been talking to me all afternoon about the vicissitudes that the Yaqui Indians had suffered after the big Yaqui Wars of the 20s, when they were deported by the Mexican government from their native homeland in the state of Sonora in northern Mexico to work in sugarcane plantations in central and southern Mexico. The Mexican government had had problems with endemic wars with the Yaqui Indians for years. Don Juan told me some astounding, poignant Yaqui stories of political intrigue and betrayal, deprivation, and human misery. I had the feeling that Don Juan was setting me up for something, because he knew that those stories were my cup of tea, so to speak. I had, at that time, an exaggerated sense of social justice and fair play. Circumstances around you have made it possible for you to have more energy, he went on. You have started the recapitulation of your life. You've looked at your friends for the first time as if they were in a display window. You arrived at your breaking point, all by yourself, driven by your own needs. You canceled your business, and above all, you have accrued enough inner silence. All of these made it possible for you to make a journey through the dark sea of awareness. Meeting me in that town of our choice was that journey, he continued. I know that a crucial question almost reached the surface in you, and that for an instant you wondered if I really came to your house. My coming to see you wasn't a dream for you. I was real, wasn't I? You were as real as anything could be, I said. I had nearly forgotten about those events, but I remembered that it did seem strange to me that he'd found my apartment. I had discarded my astonishment by the simple process of assuming that he'd asked someone for my new address, although if I had been pressed, I wouldn't have been able to come up with the identity of anyone who would have known where I lived. Let us clarify this point, he continued. In my terms, which are the terms of the sorcerers of ancient Mexico, I was as real as I could have been, and as such I actually went to your place from my inner silence to tell you about the requisite of infinity, and to warn you that you were about to run out of time. And you, in turn, from your inner silence, veritably went to that town of our choice to tell me that you had succeeded in fulfilling the requisite of infinity. In your terms, which are the terms of the average man, it was a dream fantasy in both instances. You had a dream fantasy that I came to your place without knowing the address, and then you had a dream fantasy that you went to see me. As far as I'm concerned, as a sorcerer, what you consider your dream fantasy of meeting me in that town was as real as the two of us talking here today. I confessed to Don Juan that there was no possibility of my framing those events in a pattern of thought proper to Western man. I said that to think of them in terms of dream fantasy was to create a false category that couldn't stand up under scrutiny, and that the only quasi-explanation that was vaguely possible was another aspect of his knowledge, dreaming. No, it is not dreaming, he said emphatically. This is something more direct and more mysterious. By the way, I have a new definition of dreaming for you today, more in accordance with your state of being. Dreaming is the act of changing the point of attachment with the dark sea of awareness. If you view it in this fashion, it's a very simple concept and a very simple maneuver. It takes all you have to realize it, but it's not an impossibility, nor is it something surrounded with mystical clouds. Dreaming is a term that has always bugged the hell out of me, he continued, because it weakens a very powerful act. It makes it sound arbitrary. It gives a sense of being a fantasy, and this is the only thing it is not. I tried to change the term myself, but it's too ingrained. Maybe someday you could change it yourself, although, as with everything else in sorcery, I'm afraid that by the time you could actually do it, you won't give a damn about it, because it won't make any difference what it is called anymore. Don Juan had explained at great length during the entire time that I'd known him that dreaming was an art discovered by the sorcerers of ancient Mexico, by means of which ordinary dreams were transformed into bona fide entrances to other worlds of perception. He advocated, in any way he could, the advent of something he called dreaming attention, which was the capacity to pay a special kind of attention or to place a special kind of awareness on the elements of an ordinary dream. I'd followed meticulously all his recommendations and had succeeded in commanding my awareness to remain fixed on the elements of a dream. The idea that Don Juan proposed was not to set out deliberately to have a desired dream, but to fix one's attention on the component elements of whatever dream presented itself. Then Don Juan had showed me energetically what the sorcerers of ancient Mexico considered to be the origin of dreaming, the displacement of the assemblage point. He said that the assemblage point was displaced very naturally during sleep, but that to see the displacement was a bit difficult because it required an aggressive mood, and that such an aggressive mood had been the predilection of the sorcerers of ancient Mexico. Those sorcerers, according to Don Juan, had found all the premises of their sorcery by means of this mood. It is a very predatory mood, Don Juan went on. It's not difficult at all to enter into it, because man is a predator by nature. You could see, aggressively, anybody in this little village, or perhaps someone far away while they're asleep. Anyone would do for the purpose at hand. What's important is that you arrive at a complete sense of indifference. You are in search of something, and you are out to get it. You're going to go out looking for a person, searching like a feline, like an animal of prey, for someone to descend on. Don Juan had told me, laughing at my apparent chagrin, that the difficulty with this technique was the mood, and that I couldn't be passive in the act of seeing, for the sight was not something to watch, but to act upon. It might have been the power of his suggestion, but that day when he had told me all this, I felt astoundingly aggressive. Every muscle of my body was filled to the brim with energy, and in my dreaming practice, I did go after someone. I wasn't interested in who that someone might have been. I needed someone who was asleep, and some force I was aware of, without being fully conscious of it, had guided me to find that someone. I never knew who the person was, but while I was seeing that person, I felt Don Juan's presence. It was a...
Alright, that's when the video for that one ends, so I'm going to move it over to this part and continue on. Sorry about that.
strange sensation of knowing that someone was with me by an undetermined sensation of proximity that was happening at a level of awareness that wasn't part of anything that I had ever experienced. I could only focus my attention on the individual at rest. I knew that he was a male, but I don't know how I knew that. I knew that he was asleep because the ball of energy that human beings ordinarily are was a little bit flat. It was expanded laterally. And then I saw the assemblage point at a position different from the habitual one, which is right behind the shoulder blades. In this instance, it had been displaced to the right of where it should have been, and a bit lower. I calculated that in this case it had moved to the side of the ribs. Another thing that I noticed was that there was no stability to it. It fluctuated erratically and then abruptly went back to its normal position. I had the clear sensation that obviously my presence and Don Juan's had awakened the individual. I had experienced a profusion of blurred images right after that, and then I woke up back in the place where I'd started. Don Juan had also told me all along that sorcerers were divided into two groups. One group was dreamers, the other was stalkers. The dreamers were those who had a great facility for displacing the assemblage point. The stalkers were those who had a great facility for maintaining the assemblage point fixed on that new position. Dreamers and stalkers complemented each other and worked in pairs, affecting one another with their given proclivities. Don Juan had assured me that the displacement and the fixation of the assemblage point could be realized at will by means of the sorcerer's iron-handed discipline. He said that the sorcerers of his lineage believed that there were at least 600 points within the luminous sphere that we are, that when reached at will by the assemblage point can each give us a totally inclusive world. Meaning that, if our assemblage point is displaced to any of these points and remains fixed on it, we will perceive a world as inclusive and total as the world of everyday life, but a different world nevertheless. Don Juan had further explained that the art of sorcery is to manipulate the assemblage point and make it change positions at will on the luminous spheres that human beings are. The result of this manipulation is a shift in the point of contact with the dark sea of awareness, which brings as its concomitant a different bundle of zillions of energy fields in the form of luminous filaments that converge on the assemblage point. The consequence of new energy fields converging on the assemblage point is that awareness of a different sort than that which is necessary for perceiving the world of everyday life enters into action, turning the new energy fields into sensory data that is interpreted and perceived as a different world, because the energy fields that engender it are different from the habitual. He had asserted that an accurate definition of sorcery as a practice would be to say that sorcery is the manipulation of the assemblage point for purposes of changing its focal point of contact with the dark sea of awareness, thus making it possible to perceive other worlds. Don Juan had said that the art of the stalkers enters into play after the assemblage point has been displaced. Maintaining the assemblage point fixed in its new position assures sorcerers that they will perceive whatever new world they enter in its absolute completeness, exactly as we do in the world of ordinary affairs. For the sorcerers of Don Juan's lineage, the world of everyday life was but one fold of a total world consisting of at least 600 folds. Don Juan went back again to the topic under discussion, my journeys through the dark sea of awareness, and said that what I'd done from my inner silence was very similar to what is done in dreaming when one is asleep. However, when journeying through the dark sea of awareness, there was no interruption of any sort caused by going to sleep, nor was there any attempt whatsoever at controlling one's attention while having a dream. The journey through the dark sea of awareness entailed an immediate response. There was an overpowering sensation of the here and now. Don Juan lamented the fact that some idiotic sorcerers had given the name dreaming awake to this act of reaching the dark sea of awareness directly, making the term dreaming even more ridiculous. When you thought that you had the dream fantasy of going to that town of our choice, he continued, you had actually placed your assemblage point directly on a specific position on the dark sea of awareness that allows the journey. Then the dark sea of awareness supplied you with whatever was necessary to carry on that journey. There's no way whatsoever to choose that place at will. Sorcerers say that inner silence selects it unerringly. Simple, isn't it? He explained to me then the intricacies of choice. He said that choice for warrior travelers was not really the act of choosing, but rather the act of acquiescing elegantly to the solicitations of infinity. Infinity chooses, he said. The art of the warrior traveler is to have the ability to move with the slightest insinuation, the art of acquiescing to every command of infinity. For this, a warrior traveler needs prowess, strength, and above everything else, sobriety. All those three put together give, as a result, elegance. After a moment's pause, I went back to the subject that intrigued me the most. But it's unbelievable that I actually went to that town, Don Juan, in body and soul, I said. It is unbelievable, but it's not unlivable, he said. The universe has no limits, and the possibilities at play in the universe at large are indeed incommensurable. So don't fall prey to the axiom, I believe only what I see, because it is the dumbest stand one can possibly take. Don Juan's elucidation had been crystal clear. It made sense, but I didn't know where it made sense. Certainly not in my daily world of usual affairs. Don Juan assured me then, unleashing a great trepidation in me, that there was only one way in which sorcerers could handle all this information: to taste it through experience, because the mind was incapable of taking in all that stimulation. What do you want me to do, Don Juan? I asked. You must deliberately journey through the dark sea of awareness, he replied. But you'll never know how this is done. Let's say that inner silence does it, following inexplicable ways, ways that cannot be understood, but only practiced. Don Juan had me sit down on my bed and adopt the position that fostered inner silence. I usually fell asleep instantly whenever I adopted this position. However, when I was with Don Juan, his presence always made it impossible for me to fall asleep. Instead, I entered into a veritable state of complete quietude. This time, after an instant of silence, I found myself walking. Don Juan was guiding me by holding my arm as we walked. We were no longer in his house. We were walking in a Yaqui town I'd never been in before. I knew of the town's existence. I had been close to it many times, but I'd been made to turn around by the sheer hostility of the people who lived around it. It was a town where it was nearly impossible for a stranger to enter. The only non-Yaquis who had free access to that town were the supervisors from the federal bank, because of the fact that the bank bought the crops from the Yaqui farmers. The endless negotiations of the Yaqui farmers revolved around getting cash advances from the bank on the basis of a near speculation process about future crops. I instantly recognized the town from the descriptions of people who had been there. As if to increase my astonishment, Don Juan whispered in my ear that we were in the Yaqui town in question. I wanted to ask him how we'd gotten there, but I couldn't articulate my words. There were a large number of Indians talking in argumentative tones. Tempers seemed to flare. I didn't understand a word of what they were saying, but the moment I conceived of the thought that I couldn't understand, something cleared up. It was very much as if more light went into the scene. Things became very defined and neat, and I understood what the people were saying, although I didn't know how. I didn't speak their language. The words were definitely understandable to me, not singularly, but in clusters, as if my mind could pick up whole patterns of thought. I could say, in earnest, that I got the shock of a lifetime, not so much because I understood what they were saying, but because of the content of what they were saying. Those people were, indeed, warlike. They were not Western men at all. Their propositions were propositions of strife, warfare, strategy. They were measuring their strength, their striking resources, and lamenting the fact that they had no power to deliver their blows. I registered in my body the anguish of their impotence. All they had were sticks and stones to fight high-technology weapons. They mourned the fact that they had no leaders. They coveted, more than anything else one could imagine, the rise of some charismatic fighter who could galvanize them. I heard then the voice of cynicism. One of them expressed a thought that seemed to devastate everyone equally, including me, for I seemed to be an indivisible part of them. He said that they were defeated beyond salvation, because if at a given moment one of them had the charisma to rise up and rally them, he would be betrayed because of envy and jealousy and hurt feelings. I wanted to comment to Don Juan on what was happening to me, but I couldn't voice a single word. Only Don Juan could talk. "The Yaquis are not unique in their pettiness," he said in my ear. "It is a condition in which human beings are trapped, a condition that is not even human, but imposed from the outside." I felt my mouth opening and closing involuntarily as I tried desperately to ask a question that I couldn't even conceive of.
So that's where I wanted to stop. Again, you can always go ahead and listen to it some more from the links that I have in the description box, and you can also read more of it from the Actual Set of Infinity PDF or the book if you have it and you can find it. Now, there's a couple of things I want to go over before that last point. He talks about how dreaming attention, and how the assembly point involved with it is. And the funny thing is he told of people who called it dreaming awake as idiotic sorcerers. I'd have to say that is me. Like I'm just kind of new at all this. I call it waking dream. I called it waking dreams when I experienced it, but it needs a better term, I guess. Dreaming attention, or something, an assemblage point. I don't know. But anyways, the warrior traveler, like it was one of those things, like I don't get to choose, something chooses for me, but to have that experience. And anyways, I thought that was just kind of relating to just the experience that I've been getting that I couldn't explain, but it seems as though Don Juan Matus, a sorcerer from the key Indians, understood it and was able to train him and others to, I guess, to experience it on a more consistent basis, I guess, and understanding it more, which I'll probably have to do as well. I guess I'm a warrior traveler, if that's what they call it. Sure, I guess. But one of the things that when they visit the Yaqui town, and that they're talking about it, and this passage this is what stood out. That he says, one of them expressed a thought that seems to devastate everyone equally, including me, and it includes me too. He said if they were just defeated beyond salvation, because if at a given moment one of them had a charisma to rise up and rally them, he would be betrayed because of envy, jealousy, and hurt feelings. And we've seen this time and time again when there's some type of revolution or big rally and things that are change, things for better for everyone, except for the controllers of what is going on. They get betrayed. The betrayal is just a historic thing that happens time and time again. And heck, you'll see it even in the context of truthers, truth speakers, whatever. A lot of them will become what we easily called sellouts. But if they don't sell out, I mean, they're also and they do things truthfully. Yeah, well, they're just going to be betrayed by people you think that wouldn't betray them, and then down goes everything, because like everyone's just always waiting also for that one leader to rise up and lead people. And that also always brings me to the entire organized religion, where they always spout out about an external entity that'll come around and save them. And then I think it's funny because the Christian religion, organized religion, always seems to state that, yeah, you can't trust any of these magicians and people who works miracles, because it'll just be the Antichrist. And so of course the only ones who's able to make these miracles was Jesus Christ, right? Who wasn't the Antichrist, was Christ himself, and no one else could do all these miracles because they weren't Christ. But in the future, this person who works miracles that comes about is going to be Antichrist, and you can't trust them. It always speaks to me. It's like, what? Where's the logic behind that? And of course, there isn't really much logic in organized religion. But then again, when the actual Christ comes, then everything starts becoming destroyed, and that just seems weird, right? But yeah, that's that part. So I'm gonna go into one last part, which is gonna be 199. It's kind of right afterwards of it, and here we go.
Inorganic awareness. At a given moment in my apprenticeship, Don Juan revealed to me the complexity of his life situation. He had maintained, to my chagrin and despondency, that he lived in the shack in the state of Sonora, Mexico, because that shack depicted my state of awareness. I didn't quite believe that he really meant that I was so meager, nor did I believe that he had other places to live, as he was claiming. It turned out that he was right on both counts. My state of awareness was very meager, and he did have other places where he could live, infinitely more comfortable than the shack where I had first found him. Nor was he the solitary sorcerer that I had thought him to be, but the leader of a group of 15 other warrior travelers, 10 women and 5 men. My surprise was gigantic when he took me to his house in central Mexico, where he and his companion sorcerers lived. "Did you live in Sonora just because of me, Don Juan?" I asked him, unable to stand the responsibility, which filled me with guilt and remorse and a sensation of worthlessness. "Well, I didn't actually live there," he said, laughing. "I just met you there." But you never knew when I was coming to see you, Don Juan," I said. "I had no means to let you know." "Well, if you remember correctly," he said, "there were many, many times when you didn't find me. You had to sit patiently and wait for me for days sometimes." "Did you fly from here to Guaymas, Don Juan?" I asked him, in earnest. I thought that the shortest way would have been to take a plane. "No, I didn't fly to Guaymas," he said with a big smile. "I flew directly to the shack where you were waiting." I knew that he was purposefully telling me something that my linear mind could not understand or accept, something that was confusing me to no end. I was at the level of awareness in those days when I asked myself incessantly a fatal question: what if all that Don Juan says is true? I didn't want to ask him any more questions because I was hopelessly lost trying to bridge our 2 tracks of thought and action. In his new surroundings, Don Juan began painstakingly to instruct me in a more complex facet of his knowledge, a facet that required all my attention, a facet in which merely suspending judgment was not enough. This was the time when I had to plummet down into the depths of his knowledge. I had to cease to be objective, and at the same time I had to desist from being subjective. One day, I was helping Don Juan clean some bamboo poles in the back of his house. He asked me to put on some working gloves because he said the splinters of bamboo were very sharp and easily caused infections. He directed me on how to use a knife to clean the bamboo. I became immersed in the work. When Don Juan began to talk to me, I had to stop working in order to pay attention. He told me that I'd worked long enough and that we should go into the house. He asked me to sit down in a very comfortable armchair in his spacious, almost empty living room. He gave me some nuts, dried apricots, and slices of cheese neatly arranged on a plate. I protested that I wanted to finish cleaning the bamboo. I didn't want to eat. But he didn't pay attention to me. He recommended that I nibble slowly and carefully, for I would need a steady supply of food in order to be alert and attentive to what he was going to tell me. "You already know," he began, "that there exists in the universe a perennial force which the sorcerers of ancient Mexico called the Dark Sea of Awareness. While they were at the maximum of their perceiving power, they saw something that made them shake in their pantaloons, if they were wearing any. They saw that the Dark Sea of Awareness is responsible not only for the awareness of organisms, but also for the awareness of entities that don't have an organism." "What is this, Don Juan? Beings without an organism that have awareness?" I asked, astonished, for he'd never mentioned such an idea before. "The old shamans discovered that the entire universe is composed of twin forces," he began. "Forces that are, at the same time, opposed and complementary to each other. It is inescapable that our world is a twin world. Its opposite and complementary world is one populated by beings that have awareness, but not an organism. For this reason, the old shamans called them inorganic beings." "And where is this world, Don Juan?" I asked, munching unconsciously on a piece of dried apricot. "Here, where you and I are sitting," he replied matter-of-factly, but laughing outright at my nervousness. "I told you that it's our twin world, so it's intimately related to us. The sorcerers of ancient Mexico didn't think like you do in terms of space and time. They thought exclusively in terms of awareness. Two types of awareness coexist without ever impinging on each other because each type is entirely different from the other. The old shamans faced this problem of coexistence without concerning themselves with time and space. They reasoned that the degree of awareness of organic beings and the degree of awareness of inorganic beings were so different that both could coexist with the most minimal interference." "Can we perceive those inorganic beings, Don Juan?" I asked. "We certainly can," he replied. "Sorcerers do it at will. Average people do it, but they don't realize that they're doing it because they're not conscious of the existence of a twin world. When they think of a twin world, they enter into all kinds of mental masturbation, but it has never occurred to them that their fantasies have their origin in a subliminal knowledge that all of us have, that we are not alone." I was riveted by Don Juan's words. Suddenly I had become voraciously hungry. There was an emptiness in the pit of my stomach. All I could do was to listen as carefully as I could and eat. "The difficulty with your facing things in terms of time and space," he continued, "is that you only notice if something has landed in the space and time at your disposal, which is very limited. Sorcerers, on the other hand, have a vast field on which they can notice if something extraneous has landed. Lots of entities from the universe at large, entities that possess awareness but not an organism, land in the field of awareness of our world, or the field of awareness of its twin world, without an average human being ever noticing them. The entities that land on our field of awareness, or the field of awareness of our twin world, belong to other worlds that exist besides our world and its twin. The universe at large is crammed to the brim with worlds of awareness, organic and inorganic. Don Juan continued talking and said that those sorcerers knew when inorganic awareness from other worlds besides our twin world had landed in their field of awareness. He said that, as every human being on this earth would do, those shamans made endless classifications of different types of this energy that has awareness. They knew them by the general term inorganic beings. Do those inorganic beings have life like we have life? I asked. If you think that life is to be aware, then they do have life, he said. I suppose it would be accurate to say that if life can be measured by the intensity, the sharpness, the duration of that awareness, I can sincerely say that they are more alive than you and I. Do those inorganic beings die, Don Juan? I asked. Don Juan chuckled for a moment before he answered. If you call death the termination of awareness, yes, they die. Their awareness ends. Their death is rather like the death of a human being, and at the same time it isn't, because the death of human beings has a hidden option. It's something like a clause in a legal document, a clause that is written in tiny letters that you can barely see. You have to use a magnifying glass to read it, and yet it's the most important clause of the document. What's the hidden option, Don Juan? Death's hidden option is exclusively for sorcerers. They are the only ones who have, to my knowledge, read the fine print. For them, the option is pertinent and functional. For average human beings, death means the termination of their awareness, the end of their organism. For the inorganic beings, death means the same, the end of their awareness. In both cases, the impact of death is the act of being sucked into the dark sea of awareness. Their individual awareness, loaded with their life experiences, breaks its boundaries, and awareness as energy spills out into the dark sea of awareness. But what is death's hidden option that is picked up only by sorcerers, Don Juan? I asked. For a sorcerer, death is a unifying factor. Instead of disintegrating the organism, as is ordinarily the case, death unifies it. How can death unify anything? I protested. Death for a sorcerer, he said, terminates the reign of individual moods in the body. The old sorcerers believed it was the dominion of the different parts of the body that ruled the moods and the actions of the total body. Parts that become dysfunctional drag the rest of the body to chaos, such as, for instance, when you yourself get sick from eating junk. In that case, the mood of your stomach affects everything else. Death eradicates the dominion of those individual parts. It unifies their awareness into one single unit. Do you mean that after they die, sorcerers are still aware? I asked. For sorcerers, death is an act of unification that employs every bit of their energy. You are thinking of death as a corpse in front of you, a body on which decay has settled. For sorcerers, when the act of unification takes place, there is no corpse. There is no decay. Their bodies in their entirety have been turned into energy, energy possessing awareness that is not fragmented. The boundaries that are set up by the organism, boundaries which are broken down by death, are still functioning in the case of sorcerers, although they are no longer visible to the naked eye. I know that you're dying to ask me, he continued with a broad smile, if whatever I'm describing is the soul that goes to hell or heaven. No, it is not the soul. What happens to sorcerers when they pick up that hidden option of death is that they turn into inorganic beings, very specialized, high-speed inorganic beings, beings capable of stupendous maneuvers of perception. Sorcerers enter then into what the shamans of ancient Mexico called their definitive journey. Infinity becomes their realm of action. Do you mean by this, Don Juan, that they become eternal? My sobriety as a sorcerer tells me, he said, that their awareness will terminate the way inorganic beings' awareness terminates. But I haven't seen this happen. I have no first-hand knowledge of it. The old sorcerers believed that the awareness of this type of inorganic being would last as long as the earth is alive. The earth is their matrix. As long as it prevails, their awareness continues. To me, this is a most reasonable statement. The continuity and order of Don Juan's explanation had been, for me, superb. I had no way whatsoever in which to contribute. He left me with a sensation of mystery and unvoiced expectations to be fulfilled. On my next visit to Don Juan, I began my conversation by asking him eagerly a question that was foremost in my mind. Is there a possibility, Don Juan, that ghosts and apparitions really exist? Whatever you may call a ghost or an apparition, he said, when it's scrutinized by a sorcerer, boils down to one issue. It is possible that any of those ghost-like apparitions may be a conglomeration of energy fields that have awareness, and which we turn into things we know. If that's the case, then the apparitions have energy. Sorcerers call them energy-generating configurations. Or, no energy emanates from them, in which case they are phantasmagorical creations, usually of a very strong person, strong in terms of awareness. One story that intrigued me immensely, Don Juan continued, was the story you told me once about your aunt. Do you remember?
All right, so if you want to go ahead and listen to more of it, love, it has relating to stories and things like that. What I wanted to talk about with this point was the dark sea of awareness being this infinite oblivion void type of thing, I guess, that doesn't get accepted into the infinity, which is, it's kind of hard to describe. But yeah, he talks about twin forces in this is very similar, which is twin forces that were opposing and kind of accepting at the same time, which is very yin yang like. That was taught on the other side of vast distances, you know, and they're talking about the same concept with the Tao and stuff like that. Vesica Pisces kind of is being brought to mind, where you've got two circles, just like our eyes, right? You know, one shows one circle, another circle, and you know, in between. If you're staring straight at something, whatever you're doing, your eyes form the Vesica Pisces, and you're seeing one thing and another thing in order to superimpose onto each other, and therefore you've got the Vesica Pisces going. Same thing within being able to, we're kind of if you can think of ourselves as being a part of these two twin forces, twin worlds. You got one eye on our current reality, one eye on the veil that surrounds us, and in between, if you can figure it out, you can see what's real, what's not real, and be aware of that. And the idea of the concept of the Yaqui Indians and sources before, the entire concept of space-time was not a thing, right? It was always because that's very physical. It's very bound to the material. But when you start just thinking exclusively in terms of awareness, then things are a bit different. It's not just the material. You're also bringing into thoughts and ideas and creations, metaphysical stuff that's always been surrounded even the earliest days of even Greek philosophy and a lot of philosophy back in the past. But now all philosophy in current age, new age philosophy is always just about the physical and science. The idea of death of inorganic beings is the termination of awareness, and death of human beings, death for both, the second to dark sea of awareness, reminds me of never-ending story again, the nothing. And now that the death for human beings or sorcerers, I don't know what connotates a sorcerer. Do I become so many questions. But there's a hidden factor, which is a unifying factor with taking ayahuasca, especially the third time I experienced this unifying factor and what has to be done in order to participate in that unifying factor. And then also that if you choose the other, the idea of not to be unifying, but to be have this concept of being of utilizing power, that you have to. It is as close to an idea of hell as possible, and torture. It's like eternal torture because you have to eternally, like, for no matter how powerful or strong you are, the only one that could save you is you, and basically you're. Because of all the power you hold, it vibrates out of control. But since you have a lot of power, you use all your power in order to hold that vibration in place. And the one moment you let go is you vibrate away into nothingness. And because you are so powerful that if you control it too well, you get these spasms. It's almost like having muscle contractions, or what's that? Charlie horses. Right? It's like having Charlie horses, and so you have to kind of let go of your power a little bit. If you let go too much, then you'll vibrate away into nothing. So you got this, like, you're vibrating between that spectrum of, don't apply too much control and power, otherwise you'll vibrate away to nothingness. If you do hold on to too much control and power, you experience a lot of pain. Because of it. So in order to let go of that and have this unifying factor, you have others that take care of that for you, and the same thing that you take care of others for them, so they don't have to vibrate away into nothingness. So it's basically a lot of having a constant with you, and it has to do with being into kind of a collective. Very much with the whole energy concept, get ideas of the Matrix and the apparitional forces, kind of like Force Ghosts in Star Wars. I mean, we just see a lot of that being repeated in a lot of these stories that we kind of are always attracted to, and kind of hold fast into our ideas of how things are. The idea of becoming inorganic beings, the definitive journey, how he calls it, is very also mindful of bodhisattvas, how they're here to help everyone, even though that they've realized they can reach the potential of nirvana, being one with God type of thing, whatever you want to call it, heaven. That concept is very shared, similar to the sorcerers, where they enter into that definitive journey, the infinity, and just so much where we see like the East meeting the West and all this other stuff, different civilizations, time periods. They should have no coincidences between each other. People would say, yeah, they're everything can be a coincidence, etc. But these are so very specific ideas, how they could just be so different, but they're not, and things that you just kind of have to look out for. But anyway, that's all I wanted to share. This has been a long 2-hour video. I know I've had longer ones, but I do want to spend more time looking into the certain things, tying things in together. But in reality, in short, things are very simple, and everyone understands and knows if whether you want to call it gnosis. Deep down, we understand, we know what's going on, but all these things that are external to us, all these distractions that go in and out into this dark sea of the eternal sea of darkness type of thing. It's a lot you gotta have to focus on and have discipline with, and getting to that point. It's not easy, I would say. Otherwise, it'd be a lot of people would have figured it out and done it and helped others do it. But again, I don't think it was meant to be easy. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I think a lot of people understand that it's pretty straightforward. But anyways, there's going to be more stuff. The idea, everything breaks down to something very simple. And that's probably the only message that I have for everyone is it's very simple, people. Everything gets tight. All these loose ends tie up together pretty well. And all the things that have been formulated and tied together for us, we know isn't right for us. Anyways, that's it. And I'll see you guys another night.